Okay.
Okay, Bjørn, we are happy.
Yes.
Happy to have Bjørn Tore to our lead speaker. And Bjørn, can you is a noted Norwegian historian, and he's part of the Peace Institute, and he's going to be. He has spoken to us before, and he'll be speaking on the escape of 88 Norwegians during World War II. So Bjørn.
Thank you. Well, I'll start sharing my screen. So just see if I can do that as I did some minutes ago.
Okay.
Like this. Can you now see my slide? My first slide, the escape in small boats. I hope so. Yes, fine. Okay, thank you for inviting me again to keep this presentation for you. Since I have spoken to you not so long ago, I will not spend much time introducing myself. Just say that I am a historian with a PhD at the University of Agder, and my daily work is both at the University of Agder, but mainly at the Archive, Peace and Human Rights Center, where we have this Center for the History of Seafarers at War. And it is in that job I have working with the topic of the escapes in small boats to Britain for a couple of years. I will come back to why I started focusing on this topic. But first of all, I would like just to introduce a broader picture. I guess you know that Norway was occupied by Germany from 1940 to 1945, and in those 5 years, a lot of Norwegians fled from Norway. This map, I tried to visualize that most people fled. They fled to Sweden, of course, because that was most easy, most convenient, and the less dangerous route. So about 60,000 Norwegians fled Sweden during the war. And if I can say, only 180 died in that escape. Another escape route was by boat to Great Britain. And in total, about 3,300 escaped by boat to Great Britain from Norway. And 10%, about 10% of those died either by being captured or being killed, or died because the boat or the ship went down or sank. But and this escape to Great Britain on sea is quite well known among people who have read about the Norwegian war history. But I would guess that it's not so many people who know about the small wooden boats that escaped from the Agder region, my region where I live, to Great Britain. The two first years of the war, 1940 to 1941. And that's the topic I will speak about today. The very first boat that fled from Agder to Great Britain during the war was as early as 29th April 1940. And you see, it's only 20 days after the German invasion, and the fights were still going on in Norway at that time. And those 4 persons that fled in this boat you can see here, they were coming from a Norwegian Navy boat or Navy vessel, which had been in Jøssingfjord in Rogaland, and they had brought their lifeboat from this Navy vessel, and they used it by sail and the road from Hidra, which is outside Flekkefjord, to Peterhead, which lies in Scotland. And they only used 2 days and 16 hours to cross the North Sea from Hidra. And in that, during that time, they were attacked by German planes, but managed still to escape those planes and reach Scotland after only 2.5 days. And they did so because they wanted to continue fighting. That was impossible from where they were at that time. And they joined all the Norwegian Navy again in Great Britain. Norway had both a navy and an army, and also an air force and a merchant fleet, which all were quite eager to include persons like this who showed their courage to reach Great Britain during the war. Because they had to have courage to make such a crossing. And because there were several obstacles if you wanted to escape from Agder during that time. First, you had to get a boat. That was not always easy. Some people have to steal it, others have to buy it. Some people had their own boat they could use. And these boats were often very small, so it was not seen as travel to Great Britain was not something one usually did in that kind of small boat. But even if you had a boat, you also had to get fuel, and during the war, getting fuel to the boat was very difficult as well. So a lot of stealing was one way to get gasoline, perhaps stealing from a German airfield or other places. You can try to get fuel. And then, of course, you didn't have any weather forecast at that time. You just had to go out, look at the weather, and perhaps listen to people who were used to go out on the sea and try to judge if the weather was looking okay. And because going over the North, crossing the North Sea would take approximately 5 days normally. And on that 5 days, the weather could change dramatically. And they did so to many of those boats that traveled. And you can see the picture here is taken from the North Sea during one of the boats that traveled from Flekkefjord. And also a great challenge was to navigate without any equipment, to cross the North Sea and try to reach Great Britain was not something you can just do. You had to have the skills to do that, or just try your luck. And we shall see that the boats, they reached a lot of different places in Great Britain, which shows that the navigation was in fact a great challenge indeed. And actually there were mines as well. Mines both on the Norwegian side of the route, but also when you entered the British waters, there were also minefields there that were also incredibly dangerous. And of course, I forgot to mention a very important obstacle, and that was the German police and the German military. The German police on land, the Gestapo, which always tried to find those who wanted to escape, and also the military, boats and planes, which tried to stop every single boat that tried to make such a trip. So this was just to illustrate that it wasn't just to take a boat and make the crossing. It was a lot of obstacles. And one of those tragic examples that this was indeed dangerous was those 4 men you can see here, 2 persons you can add as well, 6 persons on the sailing boat of Good Hope. They tried their luck from Arendal, which is quite along east in Agder. They traveled from Arendal at the 27th of July, 1941. And they reached Lista, which is the most southwestern part of Agder, which probably was the last stop in Agder before they started the crossing. But there they were captured by a German military vessel at 10 days at the 27th of July. And at this time, it was very hard sentences for people who were caught in trying to escape to Britain. So 5 of these 6 persons, they were sentenced to death and executed in 1942, 1 year after. The 6th person, he was sent to a German prison camp in Germany, where he overcome very harsh treatment. He survived the war, but he was too sick when he returned back home and died in 1946. So in fact, all 6 men died from this Good Hope ship. And if some of you can read Norwegian, I would recommend the book Slik dør menn, which means this is the way how men dies, which is written by the Norwegian priest who talked to all the Norwegian prisoners who were sentenced to death before they were executed. And he also spoke to these persons here and share what their thoughts, and also share a letter of goodbye to their loved ones. And it's quite moving book to read, both about these persons, but also about the other persons this priest Dagfinn Hauge met. So this was just to show you how dangerous this could be to make such a crossing. We have tried to find out how many boats that really made effort to try to cross the Northern Sea. And it's quite difficult because there aren't any data or archives that you can just go into and find this information. So we have searched very wide in both literature and archives, and also in British archives. And one of our findings there was this remarkable photo here. I found the photo in the Imperial War Museum. They have a lot of photos from the Second World War, and this series of photos of these persons here, I just found it by searching on Norway and on Norwegian, because this kind of boat is quite special to my region. I tried to find out if these maybe came from my region, and in the end I managed to find out that these 5 persons, they came from Flekkefjord, and they traveled from Flekkefjord in late August 1940. They met very hard conditions during the crossing, but they were lucky. Both because you see on the back here, you have a very experienced seaman who knew how to steer the boat and where to steer it. And also, they were found by British military vessels outside the Orkney Islands. And from there, they were brought into Scapa Flow, which was the main naval base of the British Home Fleet. And you can see here, they are coming into safety. The photo at the right, you see how little the boat is together with a large boat that possibly found them. And it must have been quite an experience to be in rescue in this way. And this was the photo that was taken after they were brought up in safety on the British ship. And you see here what clothes they wear during the crossing. I don't think I would have had that kind of clothes on me if I was supposed to make a crossing today with a tie. And again, we have tried to find out not only who made the crossings, but also what did they do afterwards, because I think that tells a lot of why they did the crossing. Such a dangerous crossing. They could have just stayed in Norway and have a quiet life and just waiting for the war to finish. But these persons, they wanted to come over to freedom and join the fight for the Allies. That's very clear when we look at what they did afterwards, after they came to Britain. They went into very dangerous service as well. One of these young men joined the American Army. He was killed in Italy in March 1945. Another one of these young men joined the merchant fleet, and he died only 2 months after this picture was taken, during after his ship was sunk in the Norwegian merchant fleet. So 2 of these 5 men did not survive the war because of the service they risked their life to serve in during this crossing. And this captain on this little ship, the one on the left here, his name was Axel Olsen-Wadel, and he was and became a very renowned Norwegian captain on the merchant fleet. This slide you see here is from the so-called War Sailor Registry, or the online register that we have made, which document the history of all the Norwegian seafarers on the merchant fleet and in the Navy. I found his page on our register here, which showed that after he reached England in August 1940, he entered the Norwegian merchant fleet and became a captain on one of the ships until his ship sank, but he survived and also survived the war. And his ship was, so maybe you can see it, DS Isbjørn. So this shows both, in a way, an example of one of the boats that traveled from Agder, but also what kind of service they entered. And we started, before this presentation started, we discussed the Ukraine war now, and I believe that it's strange to talk about Second World War now when there is a war raging in Europe, but I think that when we discover what people in Norway was willing to do when their country was occupied in 1940 and 41, I think that make it perhaps it's make it make it more easy for us to imagine what the Ukrainians now feel and why they fight so strongly to save their homeland right now. So I hope maybe this presentation also can bring that aspect into the current situation. There were several boats that went over from Agder to the Great Britain, and this is possibly my favorite photo of such a crossing because it's something in those faces. I think it's freedom in their eyes and in their smile. It's taken. I don't know where in the North Sea it's taken, but I'm quite sure that they are confident that this will really, they will really make it happen. They will really go to the, which they did. And again, these persons, they went really dangerous service after they entered Great Britain. Two of these, those two in the front, Tallaksen and Fjelstad, they were both awarded the War Cross with the Sword, which is the highest ranked Norwegian medal. They both received the medals because they joined the service in Company Linge, which was a special service, a very dangerous one. Tallaksen, he was killed in Oslo. He cooperated closely with Max Manus, and if you have seen the film Max Manus, you can see how he was killed. And but Fjelstad here, he survived and lived in Kristiansand after the war. So it's quite coincidence who will survive and who will not. And that was certainly also the case in another boat that traveled. We don't have a photo from that crossing, but we have a photo taken when they reached London. Those three persons here, Fridtjof Pedersen, Odd Starheim, and Alf Lindeberg, they reached London in 1940 and took this photo there. Very proud, of course. And you can see at the right here, we have a copy of the logbook written during the escape from Agder. And it's quite interesting to read how their boat, which they called Viking, how they managed to overcome all the kind of difficulties to reach over to Great Britain and freedom, but not only freedom, but also a very dangerous service. Because all three of these persons here, they joined very, very dangerous service in Company Linge. And all three of them died. Alf Lindeberg here, they reached Aberdeen August 1940 and then went to London. And you can see as soon as 3 months later, December 1940, he was arrested on a secret mission in Norway, very close to his home. And again, it's very fascinating and interesting that they risked their life on a little boat to cross the North Sea and then travel back again to Norway on an even more dangerous mission. Alf Lindeberg, he was given the right to write a farewell letter before he was executed in August 1941. I can try to translate a little bit of it. You can see a copy of the farewell letter. Parents and sister and brother here. It says, dear parents, Yes.
Bjorn? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's you're fading out occasionally. Try to speak
Okay.
up a little bit more if you could.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Yeah. The letter says, "Dear parents, now my life is ending, and I want to thank you for all you have been to me. And yeah, I should have said it before, but he tried to comfort his parents and try to tell them that they should not be sorry for it. And it's quite moving. Yeah. Because this was a result of his secret mission in Norway, but it was also very dangerous to make a crossing because in 1948, at this time, it was also made make a death penalty for those who would escape from Norway. So that also was a reason that after 1941, nobody did the same escape from Agder, I believe. Alf Lindeberg was executed 11th of August 1941, and this ship was named after him. It's the Norwegian merchant fleet from Norwegian Ocean Fleet, and it was named Alf Lindeberg. This was a way to commemorate Norwegian freedom fighters who were executed or killed in the service for Norway. And Nortra ship, which was handling the Norwegian merchant fleet, did so to several Norwegian freedom fighters during the war, as a way to both commemorate, but also, I think, to inspire those seamen serving on those ships. And I think it was a very fine way to commemorate, in particular, those who gave their lives for a good cause. This was a way to commemorate, but when I watched an earlier presentation on this forum, I think it was Phil Eskeland, I believe, who showed this photo from the 1944 7th of May parade in Brooklyn, which shows the smallest boat that ever crossed from Norway to British Isles. I haven't managed to find out if this was one of the boats from my region, but it surely looked like one of them. And it would be great to find out what happened to the boat and which boat was this. It was indeed fascinating to see that as soon as 1944, one tried to show how Norwegians fled in small boats from their home country to join the fight for freedom. So if anybody has more information on this boat, I will gladly receive that information. Now, the reason why I started this, try to find out more about these crossings of the small boats, was that we were contacted by some enthusiastic, what should I call them, men who wanted to try to do the same thing in Norway today. And so they tried with these two boats, try to prepare a crossing on the 80th anniversary of ending of the war. And they called the boat Free, which means freedom. And they managed to get a boat from 1930s. So it would supposed to be a similar boat that made the crossings more than 8 years ago. But during training, they trained both going to Sweden and also out in very bad weather here outside Kristiansand. They had to be rescued by some rescue ships. And they found out that if they were supposed to do a similar crossing today to Great Britain, they had to find a newer boat, but a similar one from which were used in 1940-41. So here you see three of those who want to make a similar expedition this spring. And behind them you see a quite new boat called 3-4, because they have both with 3-2 and 3-3. They didn't manage to to fulfill the training, but with this boat they are quite confident that they will manage to make a crossing this April. I have been given the possibility to join them, but I wouldn't dare. It's too dangerous for me, but they say it will be quite safe. But their goal is to try to commemorate all those who did a similar journey in much, much more dangerous conditions 80 years ago. And the plan is to arrive in Buckie, which is a small Scottish village north of Aberdeen. And it's because of Buckie was a very Norwegian village during the war. They call the Scottish population, they call it with proudness, Little Norway. It's not the only place that call themselves Little Norway, but Buckie does that too, with proudness. And we have good connections with the community in Buckie, which will give a warm welcome, and we will try to reconnect Norway and Scotland and try to also tell the stories about those boats that went over, and also say thank you to the British population that helped Norwegians so much during the war. That's also a part of this project, and why I also have been doing this research. So if you like to follow the preparations, but also when they travel in April, you can follow the expedition on Facebook. You just type Englands farere, which means England journeys, or England travelers. I will say it more better translation. And if you type that on Facebook, you will find their page, and you can follow their preparation and the expedition when it happens. So why is the boat called Fri? Well, that's because of 3-1, which was a boat that we also have a very interesting account of how it took place. Finn Narvesen was one of those who joined 3-1, which means freedom. And we have this very interesting account where he writes very with a lot of colors on how the journey to Great Britain took place. And what was very interesting was that when we received a color film from another seaman after the war, we suddenly recognized one of the persons on the photo, and that was Finn Narvesen indeed. You see the man in the middle steering the boat under the Norwegian flag. That is the same man, Finn Narvesen, who did the crossing from Norway. And after he did the crossing, he served on the Norwegian ship Cutty as a radio operator for the rest of the war. And after the war, he emigrated to the USA and became an American citizen, like so many other Norwegian seamen. So that is also a very fascinating story. they escaped from Agder in a little small boat free, and he ended up as an American citizen in the end. So when I've gone through this, I think it's quite surprisingly a lot of high rate of survival. In fact, when you look at the odds, we have, after searching and looking in archives and in literature, we have found 21 known attempts with small boats from Agder. Of those, in those 21 boats, there were 97 persons, all men. I don't think it's a coincidence that 29 of them were seamen. I think having a seaman on board was quite important to have a good chance of getting the boat safe and sound to Great Britain. But it's also interesting to see that 10 of those 97 were students, possibly because they were young, idealistic, and possibly did not have any families yet to take care of. Of those boats that traveled, one boat disappeared with 2 men. We don't know what happened, but it probably just went down because of the weather. 2 boats were captured by the Germans. We have I have talked about the Good Hope, where all 6 were killed in the end. But there were also another boat where 2 persons were captured and sent to Germany and died in captivity. But still, there were 18 boats with 87 men on board that reached the UK, and that's quite impressive, I think. But again, I will just stress, talking about numbers, I don't know if these numbers are the numbers we have when we have finished the project, because there are great uncertainties here and possibly more boats and more men that we don't know about. So be careful to reuse my numbers here. This map shows where the boats arrived, where in Britain. And as you can see, it's quite a big, from Grimsby in the south to Scapa Flow and Orkney Islands in the north. I think that illustrates the difficulties of navigation. Looking at the stars, having possibly problems with the boat. I know one boat, it nearly ended in the Netherlands, but managed to go north again before they entered Great Britain. So it was one of the great obstacles indeed. And then I think it's also important, as I have stressed before, to say that they did not flee from something. I believe that they flee to something. They wanted to join the struggle, the fight for freedom. When they landed in Aberdeen or in Grimsby or whatever, they all had to be taken down to the patriotic school in London to be interrogated first to see if they were German spies, because that was a realistic possibility for any foreign person entering the Great Britain. But after then, you would be placed at active duty in Norwegian Army, Navy, Special Forces, Air Force, or the Merchant Navy, which almost all of these near 100 persons did. And after searching in the archives, we found out that nearly 20 of those who reached Great Britain, they were killed later on in the war. So it was quite a dangerous service they joined into after entering freedom. And that also, I believe, makes it important to commemorate them and telling their story, because they it's a story that needs to be not to be forgotten, but also to be remembered and commemorated. Yes. That was the slides I have. I don't think it's always difficult to make a judgment on how many boat trips you want to talk about. And I just wanted to bring up some of them, but
Yeah.
I think all stories are worth telling, of course.
Yes, I think that covers it pretty well. I'd like to open this now. All of these boat trips left at the same place. Is that correct?
Can you repeat the question,
Okay.
please?
All the trips, all the boats, when they left Norway, they always left in the same place in Norway. Was that because of a geographic reason?
No, they left. Well, this was from the Agder region, and they mostly followed the coastline to Lista or to Lindesnes, and then going out to Great Britain. I don't. This was not organized, so I don't think they did not get any instructions on where to go and how to do it. I think most of these crossings were just made by persons individually agreeing just do it. And then it was more based on what people thought was the best route to take.
So they did want a point in Norway that was very close to England and Scotland.
Yeah, the closest one, but it's quite far as well, taking up to 5 days. So
yes, and of course they did not have good the type of navigation that we have today. So that was stars and so on. And obviously they had to keep radio silence during the trip.
They did not have a radio.
They didn't have radio, yeah.
No.
So, okay,
We've heard about the retribution to some of the families for people that left.
Yeah, that was also one of the obstacles. They had to be prepared that their families could be jailed if one of them flew from their country. But I haven't managed to find any yet. But that would be possibly a new case to try to find out, because we have this register of all the prisoners in Norway. So if you could check that with the families of those who escaped, it would be interesting to find out if there were any punishment of the families. I don't know that.
Bjørn Tore, I was just wondering, you mentioned about German spies, and I remember my dad told me about their interrogation when they came to England, etc. Do we know about were there many spies? I don't think there were many, but were there any that were caught at all, or, you know?
That's a good question, because there were a lot of people who were suspected to be agents from the German Abwehr in particular, but not from the Agder region, but more from those who sailed from Vestlandet, from Bergen and Ålesund, and all those who were suspected to be agents. They were placed at the Isle of Man, and both people who were innocent but were suspected to be agents, and also those who really were agents. But I don't know a number. I only know that there are great speculations that the numbers are quite high.
Yeah, I'm always amazed how difficult it was crossing both the Shetland bus and then going in a little boat, because when I was a student in France, we came home from Southampton to Nova Scotia, And we went through, we're on a Cunard line, and we went through a snowstorm blizzard, and everybody on the ship was sicker than dogs. We had a very famous bandmate. He was playing Tea for Two at 11 o'clock, and you could look out and you can see the water rise above the holes, you know, the windows on the floor, and then drop. It was extremely rough. We were all sick. So going from like Bergen, or, you know, just going to the Shetland Islands from Bergen and Televogue and, you know, Olsen, that was really rough because you're in that upper part of the North Sea. But oh my God, I can feel, I remember being so sick and just having that water go up and then drop. It was a huge ship. I mean, it was a big Cunard line, and we were wobbling. It was pretty bad for like 2 days.
Not only that, but the predominant winds are going to be out of the west. So you're going against the wind, which is much worse. I had a question about the minefields that you mentioned. I don't know what the technology was. Were these things that you could see on the surface, or were they just below or well below the surface?
I'm not an expert on mines as well, but we have some accounts of some of those who did the crossing that tells that they saw mines passing by. So it was possible to see them, and that was also the case that and it was daylight. You had to have one man at the front to try to see if they could see any mines. So that was indeed one of the dangers when they were coming near land.
You know, my father actually worked for a naval ordnance. He was a physicist, and his specialty was magnetics. So he did secret work during the war, and part of it was trying to figure out how to debug the mine so it wouldn't go off. And they're huge. I mean, they could fill up your living room, you know, a good port. They're big. They're not like these little things. And I remember once he told me that they got really excited that they got one to look at, and had it in a big tank in the Solomon Islands, which is south of Washington, D.C. But that's what he did, because they did lay them around Long Island, and I think they also laid them down the Gulf of Mexico. But they're pretty big, so, but they just kind of blow just slightly below the surface, I guess.
Oh, well, I had a question about the timing of all these trips with the small boats. Did they primarily come like during the first couple of years of the war, or did they regularly come all the way through, 1945?
Well, all those crossings that we know about happened in 1940 and 1941. The last one, I think, was in November 41. And after that, we don't know about any boats. And I believe it's mostly because of the death penalty that was for those who did a crossing, but possibly also that I think it was better organized resistance in Norwegian resistance, and which made the route through Sweden more easy and less dangerous. Also from my region, from Agder region. So they were made routes with normally with a train to Oslo, and then connecting with a rescue team which take you from Oslo into Sweden. And that was more safe than going on a little boat. So my theory is that it's both because of safer routes through Sweden and the death penalty of making a crossing by the boat.
But if you went to Sweden, was the goal just to get out of Norway, or was it there another route to get to the UK after Sweden?
From Sweden, it was airplane route from Stockholm to Great Britain, which Norway, they had a certain amount of places on the plane, and it was a very hard decision, and a lot of people who wanted to get on that plane, and not all could. So it was hard decisions to see who was the most important persons to get over, and the seaman was regarded as one of those main persons or group to bring over to Great Britain, together with the special agents, of course, like Max Manus, for instance. Gunnar Sønsteby.
What was various modes of propulsion on these boats? I assume they just weren't rowboats of that, and they had to be operating maybe with very little noise so that they weren't picked up by the subs out in that area or whatever.
The size of the boats?
Yes, well,
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't just rowboats.
No, there were most of those small wooden boats. They were between 18 and 22 feet long. It was one more fishing vessel that took more people on board, which was quite large, but all the others were between 18 and 22 feet long. Boats that we use today in when you are going out on a good summer day out on the sea, not traveling to Denmark or even England.
You asked about the engine. I think most of them had a two-stroke engine.
Yeah.
I know the fishing boats, and when you see those old fishing boats, which, when I was young, you saw quite a few of them. I guess if you left, they had a sort of very distinct sort of dunk, 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 dunk.
Yeah.
You just heard why I can't sing, but it's that kind of a song. It's very sort of dunk, dunk, dunk.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jürgen. I'm not an expert on motors, but the sound is just like that.
Well, when they moved the gold around before they moved it to London, aside from some of the larger, so they used some of these puffer boats. Were any of those employed?
I'm not sure what a puffer boat is. Can you
Like
explain
a
to me?
pop, 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 like a steam system or that.
Yeah, possibly, but I'm sorry, I'm not very good at motors. So,
But it sounds again like you describing a two-stroke engine, which was all the
Right.
because they had this heavy oil back then. They didn't have the kind of refined fuel we have today. So I think it is a two-stroke engine, but they probably have slightly different sounds because of the size and things like that.
It seems like if a plane spotted you, how could you'd be a sitting duck? How could you possibly escape that?
Wow.
yes, that was. But the good thing was that it was quite little, so it wasn't so easy to be spotted. So, and you could also hope that the plane was not interested in a very little boat. But of course, it wasn't much you could do. And when a plane spotted you, you just had to hope that it was a British one and not a German one. And a lot of accounts tells exactly that they were extremely nervous about what kind of planes that were coming, because they wanted to be rescued by the British, but not be spotted by the Germans, of course.
Yeah,
It's also possible it could have been German spotter planes that didn't have any armaments on it, maybe, and then they call it in, and then the German fighter plane can't find it because it's too small. So who knows what
That
happens
makes
there
sense.
too.
That makes sense.
But
no.
oh, but I appreciate showing that slide again from the 17th of May parade. I'd be curious about the, I guess, the name of that boat or who was on it, but I thought it was interesting that, you know, this is a slide that's in the Library of Congress of, you know, things in importance in US history. And so they had all these pictures from the 17th of May parade from 1944. And then this was the highlight. I mean, there must have been about 10 or so of these slides of, you know, different angles. The one that you showed here was, I think, the one that was the best, that captured the whole boat. But there was no name on the boat. It just says that it was a 22-foot boat. I think it's probably used to inspire the local Norwegian American population there. Because who knows, they might have been discouraged in seeing that, you know, maybe there was a perception that at the time that maybe Norway wasn't doing a lot in World War II. And then here was something symbolic that's showing these people were actively resisting, and they were willing to endure all these harsh elements to then go on with the fight. So I think that it probably encouraged a lot of the local Norwegian American population that were living in Brooklyn at the time.
Yeah, Brooklyn was supposed to be the third largest group of Norwegians in America, like 40,000. In fact, there's a Bergen Beach that's popped up. There is, the Historical Society might have some record of it. I think Brooklyn does, because I was looking into 1840 history in Brooklyn. And there's also a museum that's across the water in Manhattan. It's the Sea something or other, but it is a maritime history museum. They were closed for a couple of, mainly because of the hurricane that hit them a few years ago, but they had a lot of flooding. But I think COVID also shut it down. But I could send you the email site for that place, because they have, it's maritime. And Brooklyn did a lot of shipbuilding, I think, as well. But I bet you could find it. But it is interesting that it's in the Library of Congress. It's kind of cool.
It looks like a Norwegian fairing. I think there's a 22-foot model, the Gutstead boat, I think it's called. And it's very similar to the shape. It's like a 3 planks on the side. It's very well-made little rowboats, if you would, but the 22-foot is not little, but they're kind of really unique. I built one with a friend a few years back. I got a picture here. I don't know if you could see it. Did that come through? Or is that too much glare?
Yeah.
This is a 16-foot version of it, but and when I was a young guy visiting Norway, these were the local water taxis. You know, if you wanted to get across the fjord, you jumped in one of these and rode across. I took some liberties here with the sail, and that's from Scanfest a few years ago. But they are extremely seaworthy, and they're really meant. The oars are rather narrow and long that we built, but they're designed for somebody who's going to row, you know, 8 or 9 hours at a time, and they're very, very seaworthy. And there's like 3 planks to a side. So it's very economical use of materials. It's very Scandinavian, if you would, in terms of function and form. I mean, the materials are used very well. And but if you take a look at the one of the Viking ships the burial ships had a small vessel on it about 22 feet long, and the design hasn't changed much, you know. And so the one that's in Brooklyn is extremely similar to the one that's found in that grave in Norway, right? And they continued, I think, probably to tweak them and improve them for the following millennia. and you know, as long as somebody was willing to keep, you know, be able to bail, you know, they could get through some pretty rough weather.
I was curious. I don't expect anyone to know, but during war, if there's a shortage of fuel, where was the oil? What country was the oil coming from? And I guess it was constricted, or there were constraints to getting it. But who was the major oil producer mean, it was hard getting oil, right?
Yeah, but in Norway or in Great Britain or Germany, they struggle a lot to get enough oil, and therefore they entered the southern part of the Soviet Union to the Caucasus area to try to find oil areas there in Romania. But in the Western Hemisphere, it was Norwegian ships that transported oil to Great Britain, which was the most important part of their work, and that took place from the Persian Gulf, from America, and from I think it's also from Latin America.
Yeah.
From yeah. Please help me, Phil. If you...
Venezuela.
Yeah.
They the oil would be, I guess, drilled in Venezuela. They didn't have too many refineries, so they sent them up to Aruba and Trinidad and Tobago for refinement. And so that's for a lot of the oil that came from that region. A lot of the Norwegian oil tankers went through those two ports. But yeah, but where the Germans got their oil, yeah, a lot of it came from Romania. And so you may have heard there was a huge, I think it was American air raid on an oil facility in Romania.
Polesky, I think. Polesky.
Yeah. But then the Germans, they kind of, I don't know if they invented it, but they perfected the process, Fischer-Tropsch process, where you would get oil from coal. So it's very dirty, but they did that, I think, as the war was winding down.
In the beginning also, they managed to take over the oil depots, Norwegian oil depots, which were outside Oslo, actually, Slagentangen, which is north Oslo. And unfortunately, that was one of their first targets, and that was very successful. They just sent a bunch of troops down there, and the Norwegian, there was a lieutenant with some squads, which probably could have had time to blow them up, but they didn't have any orders or anything, so they just marched off. So they actually, most of the fuel that the Germans used in the beginning, well, not most, but a substantial part at least, I don't know what percentages, was actually from the Norwegian oil depots. And so that probably lasted. Later in the war, of course, they had real shortages, but the fishing fleet in Norway, which Bjørn Tore knows much more about than me, I'm sure, they were only allocated enough oil that they could go out and in, not enough to get to Great Britain. So there's all sorts of tricks, but of course, in the beginning, I don't think it was as big a problem for the Germans as it would be 2, 3, 4 years into the war.
So certainly brave people to make that journey, though, in those small boats, considering all the odds against them. But I guess, because looking at the jobs they took on after they got to England, I mean, they were adventurous type. I mean, it's a unique breed of people for sure that would make a journey like that in a small boat. I certainly wish your friends well with that trip they're planning. It's not too far off. Why did they pick April? Isn't that kind of or is that just because of the date of the escape? I mean, it would seem to be wait till the summer perhaps might be better.
Yeah, well, it's a combination because it was supposed to take place at the 80th anniversary 2 years ago, from 9 of April and after that. But those who know such things, they say that from April and onwards until August, the weather window in the North Sea is best.
Okay.
But they are prepared to wait until May or even June to see if the weather is good enough to make the crossing. They will not travel in very windy weather. So, but they say that the worst case scenario is that they have to be rescued
Okay.
They will.
Okay. I guess that is the worst case.
Yeah. But I had the possibility to join them, but I traveled with across the Skagerrak to Denmark. When I saw those high seas there, I felt that this is not for me.
Yes, I sympathize. Yes.
Thanks.
It's amazing how many people were, how many stories there are about World War II, and we have volumes and volumes already written, and this is something that's really, and there's always new stuff that people are finding or discovering, and it's a fascinating period because it, in a way, it's people's character comes out under adversity. You really find out who you are when you're being tested. And I think this is certainly true of these people who went on those boats. They have to admire their courage and commitment to Norway to do that. And
well, but there is a thing about small boats and Norwegians. They seem to know, they know those that coast is, I guess, in some ways it's somewhat natural.
Yeah.
They were doing it for a long time.
Yeah, I guess they're brought up as a seafaring nation. Goes back to our friends the Vikings.
Yeah.
But
actually, you mentioned the one you mentioned about these small boats, which has the benches go alongside, and there used to be small ferries. And I remember that from this must have been late 50s, and we lived by a shore, which well, I was going to say if you land in Oslo, but actually you don't do that anymore. It's of course Gardermoen. It's a little inlet, and there's a little island there called Killingen, and they had one of those little ferries, and you could go down there, and because I guess it was for fishing or whatever, and it was walking distance from where we lived. So my buddy and I, we used to go down there every now and then, and we would pay 1 krone for 2 tickets, which is about 15 cents in today's money, which tells you a little bit about how long ago this was. But and then we would take it out there, and then he would we would just go back and forth, or a couple of times if he had somebody else, we would stay for a few minutes there, half an hour or whatever, and then take the ferry back again. He didn't go, he went on, on demand, so to speak. But it was one of those little, and that's why I said that I remember that 2-stroke engine so well, and that was a small one. It was probably about 20 some feet. It couldn't take that many passengers. But it's a good memory today, actually.
mm-hmm. Okay. And I was just wondering, I mean, we've covered these boats. Is Bjørn Tore is a historian. If you want to comment a little bit about the current situation in Ukraine from a point of view of a historian, or is it too early to make any comments? I know historians like to have a wait till things sort themselves out a little bit more.
Well, it's very difficult because most people said that this will not take place. The invasion will not take place, and suddenly it did. And now we are trying to make analysis. Some people say that history always repeats itself, and some say that history never repeats itself. But I think it's a combination. But the most important thing is to try to learn of history, and you can learn of different wars that have taken place earlier on when you try to find out how to deal with this war, I believe. And when learning from the Second World War is that if there is an aggressive dictator, you should not trust him. And sadly, often it's only force that really makes a difference when you deal with such persons. But that's not always the case. You also have to build trust. And when I think one thing we have to learn about this is that we had this missed opportunity during the 1990s when Russia tried to be like the West. But I think that was a missed opportunity, and I think the West should have done more to try to hinder the oligarchs from grabbing all the richness of from Russia and trying to create a better society which would give the Russian population a stronger need to be more close to the Europeans. Now they are distance themselves from the Europeans and orienting themselves to China, and that's very sad. And I think we have to try to give the Russians a way back to Europe, but not by giving after from their killings and the invasion. So no, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have any more interesting things to say. I'm just sad, and of course Norway as a neighboring country to Russia, we are feeling. My daughter is asking me, what should we be afraid now? And I think a lot of countries, especially in Eastern Europe, are also asking themselves the same question. And I think we should just keep on using both the stick and the carrot. Try to give Russia a way back, but keep the stick.
Yes, we want to give Russia a way back, but not at the expense of the Ukraine. You know, we don't want to toss the Ukraine under the bus just to keep Russia happy. So yes, and so yeah, I think that's a very good point. And yeah, I think it's true that the 1990s we had a missed opportunity to strengthen the reform forces in Russia. You know, I think that's a very good point. Open up. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I wanted to ask Bjørn Tore, what do you think about the dependence on the Russian energy? I mean, Norway's a big producer in this. I mean, this was sort of a complaint by the several administrations were against those pipelines. And I mean, a cold winter can certainly, make you think twice about going to war with Russia or even having a fight with them if they're supplying, your heat. Is there a way around that? I mean, we think people will change their minds now, perhaps move away from Russian energy?
Yeah, but again, that's a dilemma, because if you want to integrate Russia into the European society, you have to also buy gas from them. But the downside is of course that you are dependent on that gas. And in this situation now, that's not a good thing. And in all Europe, the prices of gas and heating also in Norway is very high now. And that's probably because Russia has been selling less gas to Europe to try to create some disturbance in the European societies. So this is Norway will earn a lot of money because of this, because Europe would like to buy more gas from Norway. But again, if we are thinking long term, we have to find a way where Russia can sell their gas to Europe, but not by having this as a way of threatening us. So again, it's a dilemma, and I agree with your point, John, that Germany in particular has been way too dependent on the Russian gas. But then should one start with more atomic energy, then that's possibly the most alternative. I don't know.
Okay. Any other thoughts? And but I think try to end on a more optimistic note. I think just to remember that the individuals that sometimes if we think things are bad now, just think about the situation in 1939, where the two most dominant military powers in the world were Nazi Germany and Communist Russia, and neither government was run by an individual who had much concern with human life and human rights. So how that situation was, if things are bad now, they've been a lot worse in the past, and we've managed to muddle through. So hopefully we can continue to muddle through, and maybe we might even see a rebirth of democracy sometime in Russia. We can always hope. So, and we can always admire, and when you have people with the type of courage that we're talking about today, anything is possible. So again, Bjørn, I'd like to thank you for the talk. I'd like to thank everybody for participating, and we are going to put this on videotape. And so Bjørn, thank you. And if there's anything else, there's nothing else, I'll close the meeting and remind people we're going to have a talk in March on the Vikings and the founding of Dublin, which should also be another interesting lecture. So hope to see you at that point, and wish you everybody a good day. Thank you.
Tusen tack.
Thank you. Thank you, Bjørn. So.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Jorgen, yeah, again, thanks for participating, and Janet, again, thank you, and so we'll be all in touch. So bye.